I've been married to Laura for 5 years. We met in college, both full of ambition, dreams, and what I thought was genuine love. At first, she was everything to me: smart, beautiful, charming. We never had kids. Laura was never ready, and I respected that. We lived what seemed like a picture-perfect life, at least from the outside. About 8 months ago, Laura took a new job downtown. Our schedules shifted, and she started relying on taxis and Ubers to get around. Initially, I didn't think much of it. I work a demanding job in IT, and honestly, I was just relieved she wasn't stuck waiting for me to pick her up every day. But then it became a pattern. She started taking frequent rides with the same driver. She'd casually mention his name, Anthony, like it was just a normal part of her day. I even joked about how she should just hire him full-time. She laughed it off, telling me he was reliable and friendly. I trusted her. God, I trusted her so much. Over time, things began to shift between us. Laura started dressing up more, even for casual errands. She'd spend extra time on her makeup and clothes, things she used to reserve for date nights or special occasions. I tried to compliment her, but she brushed it off, saying she just wanted to feel good about herself. Our intimacy took a nosedive. She was tired, stressed, headaches, the usual excuses. I figured she was just going through a rough patch. I offered to take a weekend trip to reconnect, but she shot that idea down fast, said she couldn't step away from work. Yet she'd disappear for hours on weekends, always with vague explanations. The phone became another barrier. She'd keep it face down, silencing notifications with a flick of her finger whenever I was around. Whenever I asked who it was, she'd snap back. "Why are you so paranoid?" A few weeks ago, I stumbled upon her rideshare history while helping her update an app. My heart sank. Trips to places that didn't make sense. Addresses I didn't recognize. Some trips that seemed way longer than necessary for a simple ride home. Still, I told myself I was overthinking. I convinced myself that maybe she was meeting friends and didn't want me to worry. I feel like such an idiot. One night, she came home late, way past midnight. Her hair was messy, her lipstick smudged, and she reeked of cologne that wasn't mine. She claimed she was out with coworkers and that they'd been in a crowded bar. The smell was just from brushing past people. I swallowed that lie like a chump. I wanted to believe her. This past week, she's been going out even more. Errands that take 3 hours. Meetings that leave her breathless and red-faced when she walks through the door. I confronted her last night, and she exploded, calling me insecure, controlling, accusing me of suffocating her. The gaslighting was so intense, I actually apologized for questioning her. But something in my gut tells me I'm right. That nagging, gut-wrenching feeling won't go away. I'm not crazy. I know what I saw, what I felt. Something is horribly wrong. I don't have solid proof. Not yet. But I'm going to find out the truth. If she's doing what I think she is, I need to see it with my own eyes. I'm considering following her the next time she calls for a ride. I need closure. I need the truth, no matter how much it might destroy me. By morning, my mind was set. If she was going to lie to my face, gaslight me, and make me feel like I was the problem, I needed to catch her in the act. No more excuses. No more doubt. I installed a location tracking app on her phone while she was in the shower. I hated doing it. I felt like some kind of creep, but what else was I supposed to do? The trust was already dead. I just needed proof now. Friday afternoon rolled around, and Laura was already dressed to the nines by 3 p.m. Tight dress, heels, the kind of look she hadn't worn for me in months. She claimed she had to run some errands before dinner. I just nodded, playing the clueless husband, while my heart pounded like a drum in my chest. As soon as she left, I grabbed my car keys, opened the tracking app, and watched the little red dot on the map. It moved steadily, heading toward the downtown district. I kept my distance, my palms slick with sweat on the steering wheel. After about 15 minutes, the dot stopped. A small street behind a cluster of old buildings. Not a grocery store. Not a salon. Nothing she had any reason to be at. I parked a block away and walked slowly, my mouth dry, my legs shaking. I felt like I was on autopilot, like my body knew what I needed to do even though my brain screamed at me to turn around and forget it. Then I saw it. A black sedan parked along the curb. The engine was off, but I could see two figures inside. Her. And a man. I crept closer, my heartbeat thundering in my ears. The windows were slightly fogged, but not enough to hide the scene unfolding inside. Her head was thrown back, eyes closed, mouth parted in a breathless moan. The man, Anthony, the friendly driver, was pressed against her, his hands roaming under her dress. Her fingers clutched at his hair, pulling him closer. His shirt was unbuttoned, her dress pushed up around her waist. My stomach lurched. My knees buckled. I wanted to scream, to pound on the window and drag them out into the street, but I was frozen. The cold, ugly truth slammed into me like a freight train. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't paranoia. My wife was having sex with another man. In the backseat of a goddamn taxi. I don't know what snapped inside me, but suddenly I was moving. Before I knew it, I was pounding on the window with my fist, the sound echoing down the empty street. Bang, bang, bang. Open the fucking door, Laura! I roared. Her eyes shot open, wild and panicked. She shoved Anthony away, scrambling to pull her dress down. He fumbled with his belt, his face pale as a ghost. The door flew open, and Laura stumbled out, her heels catching on the pavement. Eric! What the hell are you doing here? What am I doing here? The audacity of her words hit me like a slap. I could barely breathe, my vision red with rage and heartbreak. You want to ask me what I'm doing here? I spat. Maybe you should explain why you're fucking your driver in the back of his car. Her eyes narrowed, and just like that, she flipped the switch. The panic vanished, replaced by a cold, defensive glare. You're insane, she screeched. This isn't what it looks like. Are you serious right now? I shouted, pointing at the half-dressed driver who was still struggling to get his shit together. I just caught you in the middle of it, Laura. Don't you dare stand there and lie to my face. But she did. Of course she did. You followed me? You're a fucking stalker, Eric. Her voice climbed to a hysterical pitch, her eyes darting around like she was the victim here. This is your fault. You're always watching me, always accusing me. No wonder I can't stand being around you anymore. Anthony finally managed to speak. Hey man, I didn't know she was married. Shut the fuck up, I snapped, barely looking at him. He shrank back like the pathetic piece of shit he was. Laura was shaking now, her fists clenched. I can't believe you'd humiliate me like this, Eric. In public. You're a fucking psycho. I laughed bitterly, the sound hollow in my ears. Humiliate you? You humiliated me the moment you spread your legs for this loser. Her eyes blazed with fury. You want to blame me for this? Maybe if you weren't such a boring, paranoid asshole, I wouldn't have needed to find someone else. I felt something inside me crack. The love I'd clung to for so long, the hope that maybe this was salvageable, shattered into a million pieces. Go to hell, Laura, I said, my voice cold and final. We're done. She opened her mouth to scream something else, but I didn't wait to hear it. I turned and walked away, the sound of my heart breaking drowned out by the click of her heels as she shouted after me. I don't remember getting back to my car. It's like I was on autopilot, my feet carrying me away from the wreckage of my marriage while my mind buzzed with static. My ears still rang with Laura's venomous words, the way she twisted everything to make me the bad guy. You're a fucking psycho. This is your fault. If you weren't so boring. Her voice played on a loop in my head, each accusation a hot knife slicing deeper into my gut. How did we get here? How did I end up being the villain in a story where she was caught screwing another man in the back of a taxi? My hands were shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. I pulled into the driveway of our house, my house, and just sat there, staring blankly at the garage door. The rage that fueled me earlier was gone, replaced by a hollow emptiness. I was numb. After what felt like an eternity, I finally dragged myself out of the car and walked inside. The house was eerily silent. The living room looked exactly the same as it did that morning, like nothing had changed. But everything had. The air felt heavy, poisoned with betrayal. I dropped onto the couch, my body slumping forward, elbows on my knees. My mind was a mess. I should have been planning my next steps, thinking logically about what to do: divorce papers, lawyers, splitting assets. But all I could do was sit there, replaying that disgusting scene in my head. About an hour later, I heard her. The sound of her heels clacking up the driveway was like nails on a chalkboard. I didn't move as she unlocked the door and stepped inside. "Eric?" she called out, her voice dripping with faux innocence. "Are you here?" I didn't answer. I just waited, my jaw clenched, staring at the floor. She appeared in the doorway, her makeup smeared, her hair a tangled mess. The same woman who had screamed at me earlier, who had lied to my face with such ease, now looked at me with wide eyes, the picture of fragile vulnerability. "Oh my God, Eric!" Her voice cracked. "I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened. I wasn't thinking. It was a mistake. Please, we can fix this." I looked up at her slowly, the numbness spreading through my chest like ice. "A mistake?" My voice was flat. "You call fucking your taxi driver in the backseat of his car a mistake?" Tears welled up in her eyes instantly, and she crumbled to the floor like a marionette whose strings had been cut. "Please, Eric." I was confused. I didn't know how to tell you that I'd been feeling lost. "But I love you. I do love you," I snorted, a humorless, bitter sound. "You love me? That's rich, Laura." She crawled toward me on her knees, clutching at my pant leg. "I swear, it didn't mean anything. He was just a distraction. A stupid, meaningless distraction." I pulled away from her grasp. "Stop it, Laura. Just stop." My voice trembled, but I forced myself to stay calm. "You can drop the act. The tears, the apologies, they don't change anything. I saw you. I heard you. You were enjoying yourself. That wasn't confusion. That was choice." Her expression twisted, the tears drying up almost instantly. The fake remorse evaporated, replaced by anger. Her eyes flashed. "So what? You're just going to throw away 5 years of marriage because of one mistake?" I stared at her in disbelief. "Throw away? You already did that. The moment you decided to screw another man." She shot to her feet, her face contorted with rage. "You think you're so perfect, Eric? You think you've never pushed me away? You work all the damn time. You never make me feel special anymore." I stood up slowly, towering over her. "So, that's your excuse? That I work too much? That I didn't shower you with enough attention? That justifies you spreading your legs for some random driver?" Her face reddened, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. You're a fucking asshole, Eric! You're cold, you're boring, and you're obsessed with controlling me." I laughed bitterly. "Controlling you? Laura, I trusted you completely. You know what's funny? Even when my gut was telling me something was wrong, I still gave you the benefit of the doubt. I still believed in us. But you killed that. You killed everything." Her eyes narrowed into slits. The tears were gone, the vulnerability erased. Now she was pure venom. "Fine. You want to play the victim? Go ahead. But you're not so perfect either, Eric. Maybe if you were more of a man, I wouldn't have had to find someone else." The words hit me like a sledgehammer. I felt the anger flare up again, red hot and blinding. But I refused to let her see how much it hurt. I took a deep breath, my voice cold and steady. "Get out," I said. Her eyes widened. "What?" I said, "Get out. Pack your shit and leave. We're done." She blinked, stunned. "You can't be serious. I've never been more serious in my life." Her lip curled. You think you can just throw me out of my house? I stepped closer, my voice dangerously low. This isn't your house anymore. You made sure of that when you brought another man into our marriage. Now pack your shit and go before I lose whatever's left of my patience. For a moment, she looked like she might argue, might launch into another tirade. But then she saw something in my eyes, something final, something that told her this was no longer a game she could win. She spun on her heel, storming up the stairs. I heard drawers opening, things being shoved into bags, her muttering curses under her breath. I didn't care. I didn't listen. I just stood there, staring at the spot where my marriage had died. When she finally stomped back down the stairs with her bags in tow, she shot me one last withering glare. You're going to regret this, Eric. I didn't respond. I just watched as she slammed the door behind her, the sound echoing through the empty house. And just like that, she was gone. When the door slammed shut behind Laura, the silence that followed was deafening. I stood there, staring at the empty space where she had just been, my mind blank. The anger had drained out of me, leaving only exhaustion and an aching emptiness. This house had once been our home. Now it was just walls, furniture, and memories I didn't want to remember. Everywhere I looked, there was a reminder of her, of us. The photos on the mantel, the throw blanket she always curled up with, the smell of her perfume still lingering in the air. I needed to clear my head. Staying here, surrounded by these ghosts, wasn't an option. I grabbed my jacket and keys and I left. No plan, no destination, just the need to get away. I drove aimlessly through the streets of the city, the street lights blurring into streaks of light through my windshield. My thoughts were a chaotic mess, swirling around the betrayal, the lies, and the way she twisted everything to make me the villain. Her words echoed in my mind. You're boring. You're controlling. Maybe if you were more of a man. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. How did it come to this? How did I become the guy who got cheated on, who got blamed for someone else's choices? I'd done everything for her. I'd supported her dreams, trusted her completely, and loved her with everything I had. And it wasn't enough. I pulled over to the side of the road, my chest heaving. The weight of it all crashed down on me, and for the first time since catching her, I let myself break. Tears I didn't know I'd been holding back spilled down my face. I didn't sob or wail. It was just silent, bitter tears of disbelief and sorrow. The life I thought I was living had been a lie. And I had no idea how to start over. After what felt like hours, I wiped my face and reached for my phone. I didn't want to be alone. I needed someone to ground me, to remind me that I wasn't losing my mind. I scrolled through my contacts and landed on the only name that made sense right now, Matt. My best friend since college, the guy who'd seen me through every up and down in my life. If anyone could help me make sense of this mess, it was him. I hit the call button. It rang a couple of times before he picked up. Eric? His voice was groggy. I'd probably woken him up. What's up, man? You okay? I took a shaky breath. No, Matt. I'm not okay. The concern in his voice sharpened immediately. What happened? She cheated on me, I said, my voice cracking. I caught her. I fucking caught her, Matt. There was a moment of stunned silence. Then, holy shit. Where are you? Pulled over somewhere downtown. I couldn't stay in the house. Stay right there. I'm coming to get you. I nodded even though he couldn't see me. Thanks, man. Don't thank me. Just sit tight. I'll be there soon. 15 minutes later, Matt's old Jeep pulled up behind my car. He hopped out and walked over, his face a mix of worry and barely contained anger. Without a word, he pulled me into a rough hug, the kind that says more than words ever could. When he pulled back, he looked me over. You look like shit. Feel like it too. Come on, he said, gesturing to his Jeep. Let's get out of here. You're not spending the night alone. I followed him, too tired to argue. The moment I slid into the passenger seat, I felt a tiny bit of the weight lift off my shoulders. At least I wasn't alone. We drove back to his place in silence. Once inside, he handed me a beer and we sat on his worn-out couch. The glow from the TV cast flickering shadows on the walls, but neither of us paid attention to whatever was on. "Tell me everything," Matt finally said, his voice low and steady. And so I did. I told him about the late nights, the weird excuses, the foggy windows of that goddamn taxi. I relived every moment of the confrontation, the lies, the gaslighting, the way she twisted the knife with every word. When I finished, he let out a long breath. "Jesus, man. I'm so sorry." "Yeah," I muttered, staring into my beer. "Me too. You know this isn't on you, right?" I scoffed. "Doesn't feel that way. She made her choices, Eric. You didn't force her into that car. You didn't make her lie to you. That's on her." I nodded, but the guilt still gnawed at me. "I just don't get it. What was missing? What did I do wrong?" Matt's jaw tightened. "Some people are just selfish assholes. It's not about what you did or didn't do. It's about her being a manipulative, cheating piece of shit." Hearing him say it out loud brought a twisted sense of relief. Someone else saw it. Someone else knew. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't alone. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of it all settling in. "What are you going to do?" Matt asked eventually. "Divorce," I said, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "I'm done. There's no coming back from this." He nodded. "Good. You deserve better than this nightmare. I just need to figure out the next steps. Lawyers, splitting assets. It feels overwhelming. We'll take it one step at a time," he said firmly. "You're not doing this alone. I've got your back." A lump formed in my throat. "Thanks, man. Anytime." Matt set up the guest room for me, and I lay there staring at the ceiling, the events of the day playing over and over in my mind. The pain was still there, raw and searing, but beneath it was a spark of determination. I wasn't going to let this destroy me. Laura had made her choices, and now I was going to make mine. Tomorrow, I'd start taking my life back. I woke up in Matt's guest room feeling like I'd been run over by a truck. My head throbbed, my body ached, and for a moment, I forgot why I was there. Then it all came flooding back, the taxi, the confrontation, Laura's twisted lies. The weight in my chest settled in again, a cold, heavy lump that made it hard to breathe. I heard movement from the kitchen and forced myself to get up. The hardwood floor felt cold under my feet, grounding me in reality. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the day ahead. Matt was already up, a mug of coffee in his hand. He looked up and gave me a nod, the kind that said, "I know you're barely holding it together." "Morning," he said, sliding a mug across the counter toward me. "Thanks." I wrapped my hands around the warm ceramic, taking a slow sip. The bitterness jolted me awake, but it didn't do much to clear the fog in my mind. "You sleep at all?" Matt asked, leaning back against the counter. "A little," I lied. The truth was, I'd spent most of the night staring at the ceiling, my thoughts spiraling down dark paths. "Figured." He rubbed the back of his neck. "So, what's the plan for today?" I let out a long breath. "I need to get my shit together. Call a lawyer, start the divorce process. Maybe get some of my stuff from the house. You want me to come with you?" I shook my head. "No. I need to do this myself." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "All right. But if you need backup, I'm just a call away." "Thanks, man." The drive back to the house felt surreal. My hands were steady on the wheel, but inside I was a mess. My mind kept replaying the moment I caught Laura in the backseat of that taxi, her body tangled with Anthony's, the look of pure panic on her face when she saw me. I pulled into the driveway and just sat there, staring at the house. It felt different now, like a place I didn't belong anymore. The walls seemed to mock me, hiding secrets I hadn't been smart enough to see. I finally got out of the car, my legs feeling like lead. The front door loomed in front of me, and for a second, I thought about turning around and leaving. But I couldn't. I had to face this. I had to face her. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The silence was suffocating. Everything was exactly how I left it. The empty living room, the faint scent of Laura's perfume. I clenched my jaw, pushing the memories away. I went straight to the bedroom. Her bed was still unmade, the sheets rumpled from the night before. My stomach twisted, imagining how many times she'd come home to this bed after being with him. I opened the closet and grabbed a duffel bag, shoving clothes into it without bothering to fold them. I didn't care about the details. I just wanted to get out of here. But as I turned to leave, something caught my eye. Her nightstand drawer was slightly open. Curiosity, mixed with a sick sense of dread, made me walk over and pull it open. Inside was a second phone. A burner phone. My heart pounded as I picked it up, the weight of it like a brick in my hand. I turned it on, and the screen lit up with messages. My fingers trembled as I scrolled through them. Anthony, can't stop thinking about last night. When can I see you again? Laura, soon. Eric's been suspicious, but I'll figure something out. Anthony, you're worth it. He doesn't deserve you. Laura, I know. He's such a boring loser. You make me feel alive. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. My own wife, mocking me, calling me a loser. The woman I thought I knew had been replaced by a stranger. A cold, calculating stranger who had no problem destroying me behind my back. I took screenshots of the messages, sent them to my email, and then slammed the drawer shut. This was the proof I needed. She couldn't gaslight her way out of this anymore. I was halfway down the stairs when the front door opened. Laura walked in, a grocery bag in her hand. She froze when she saw me, her eyes narrowing. "What the hell are you doing here?" she snapped, her voice dripping with hostility. I held up the burner phone. "You forgot this." Her face went pale. "Where did you find that?" "In your nightstand," I said, my voice cold. "Looks like you weren't as careful as you thought." She set the bag down, her hands shaking. "Eric, I can explain." "Save it," I said, cutting her off. "I've seen the messages, Laura. I know everything. The lies, the insults, the way you've been sneaking around behind my back. There's nothing left to explain." Her eyes flashed with anger. "So you've been snooping through my stuff? How dare you invade my privacy?" I laughed bitterly. "Your privacy? Are you fucking kidding me? You threw away any right to privacy the moment you decided to cheat." She crossed her arms, her face twisting into a sneer. "You think you're some kind of victim? You were never there for me, Eric. You were always working, always distracted. What was I supposed to do?" "Not cheat," I said, my voice trembling. "Not betray the person who loved you. You could have talked to me, Laura. But instead, you fucked a taxi driver and then blamed me for it." Her eyes blazed with fury. "You know what? Fine. Maybe I did cheat. Maybe I did want more than what you could give me. And guess what? I don't regret it." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stared at her, the woman I had once promised to love forever, and felt nothing but disgust. "Good," I said quietly. "Then you won't regret what comes next. I'm filing for divorce." Her eyes widened, the confidence slipping from her face. "You're serious?" "Dead serious. I'm done with you, Laura." She opened her mouth to argue, to scream, but I didn't give her the chance. I walked past her, out the door, and didn't look back. As I got into my car and drove away, a strange sense of relief washed over me. The pain was still there, raw and gnawing, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of freedom. This chapter of my life was ending. It was time to write a new one, without her. I drove away from the house, my mind a tangled mess of anger, disbelief, and the hollow ache of betrayal. The road blurred before me, and for a minute, I wasn't sure where I was even going. It didn't matter. As long as I kept moving forward, I felt like I was escaping the wreckage of my life. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I glanced at it and saw Matt's name. I let it ring. I couldn't talk yet, not to anyone. There was too much swirling inside me, and if I let any of it out, I wasn't sure I'd be able to stop. I finally ended up at a small park on the edge of town. It was empty, the swings creaking in the cold breeze. I sat on a bench, staring at nothing, my hands gripping my knees. My mind kept replaying the last few minutes with Laura. Her sneer. Her indifference. The way she said she didn't regret cheating. I clenched my jaw, a bitter laugh escaping me. I used to think that if something like this ever happened, I'd be furious. But the anger was fading, replaced by a numbness I couldn't shake. This wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the end of who I thought I was. I had loved her, trusted her, given her everything I had. And she threw it all away like it meant nothing. As I sat there, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Matt. It was a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated, then swiped to answer. Hello? My voice sounded hollow, even to me. Eric? It's Sarah. I blinked. Sarah. Laura's best friend. We hadn't spoken in months, not since Laura started pulling away from me. Hey, I said cautiously. What's going on? She sighed, a sound that seemed to carry a weight of its own. I heard what happened. About you and Laura. My stomach twisted. Yeah, I said bitterly. I'm sure she's already told you her version. There was a pause. She did. But I didn't believe her. I frowned. What do you mean? I've known something was off for a while, she said quietly. Laura changed. She started lying to me, blowing me off. And when I asked her about Anthony, she got defensive. I swallowed hard. So you knew? Not exactly, she said. But I suspected. And when I finally confronted her, she just brushed me off, said I wouldn't understand. Her voice trembled. I should have told you sooner. I'm sorry, Eric. I closed my eyes, a wave of exhaustion washing over me. It's not your fault. I just wanted you to know that not everyone's on her side. What she did was wrong. And you didn't deserve it. A lump formed in my throat. Thanks, Sarah. That means more than you know. She paused again. If you need someone to talk to, I'm here. You don't have to go through this alone. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. I appreciate it. We said our goodbyes, and I hung up, staring at the screen. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of warmth. Maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought. I couldn't hide forever. There were things to do, decisions to make. I pulled up a search on my phone and started looking for divorce lawyers. The list was long, and the thought of sifting through it made my head pound. But this was the first step toward getting my life back. Toward reclaiming some sense of control. I made an appointment with a lawyer for the next morning. As soon as I hung up, dread settled in my gut. This was really happening. There was no going back. I thought about Laura, about the look on her face when I told her it was over. She hadn't seemed shocked. She hadn't even seemed sorry. It was like she'd been waiting for me to end it, like she wanted me to be the one to pull the trigger so she wouldn't have to. It hurt more than I wanted to admit. That night, I crashed on Matt's couch again. We didn't talk much. He handed me a beer, and we watched some mindless action movie until I fell asleep. But even in sleep, there was no escape. My dreams were filled with images of Laura and Anthony, their faces twisted into cruel smiles. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart hammering in my chest. I stared at the ceiling, the darkness pressing in around me. I knew this was just the beginning. The divorce would be ugly. Laura would fight me, try to twist everything in her favor. She'd probably spread lies, try to make herself look like the victim. That was who she was, always playing the martyr, even when she was the one holding the knife. But I wouldn't let her win. Not this time. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly. I had no idea what the future looked like, but I knew one thing for sure. I was done being her fool. The next morning, I woke up on Matt's couch with a stiff neck and a hollow feeling in my chest. The weight of reality pressed down on me as I remembered where I was and why. My appointment with the lawyer was in an hour, and just thinking about it made my stomach churn. I forced myself to shower and change into clean clothes Matt had loaned me. The mirror reflected someone I'd barely recognized, dark circles under my eyes, jaw clenched tight, the spark of life completely snuffed out. When did I become this person? Matt was already up, sipping coffee at the kitchen table. He looked up and gave me a nod. You good? Not really, I muttered, rubbing my face. But I'm going to get through this. That's all you can do, he said. Want me to come with you? I shook my head. Nah, I've got this. He studied me for a moment, then clapped a hand on my shoulder. All right. But if you change your mind, just call. Thanks, man. I arrived at the law office 15 minutes early. The receptionist, a woman with a sympathetic smile, led me into a small conference room where I met David Walker, a middle-aged divorce attorney with a no-nonsense demeanor. His handshake was firm, and his eyes were sharp behind rectangular glasses. Eric, have a seat, he said, gesturing to a chair opposite his desk. I know this is a tough time, but you're taking the right steps by coming here. I nodded, feeling a lump rise in my throat. I just want to get this over with. He leaned back, his hands clasped together. Tell me everything. Don't hold back. The more I know, the better I can help you. And so I did. I told him about Laura, the late nights, the excuses, the burner phone, and finally, catching her with Anthony in the taxi. I even showed him the screenshots of the texts I'd found. When I finished, David let out a long breath. I've seen a lot of cases like this, Eric. First thing I want you to know is that this isn't your fault. Cheaters always try to shift the blame, but you didn't push her to do this. She made those choices. Hearing him say that helped, even if only a little. What happens now? I asked, my voice flat. We filed for divorce on grounds of adultery, David explained. Given the evidence you have, she won't be able to deny it. This will give us some leverage when it comes to splitting assets. Do you own the house together? I nodded. Yeah. We bought it a couple of years ago. No kids, though. That simplifies things, he said. We'll push for you to keep the house, especially since you have clear grounds for divorce. Do you think she'll fight it? I scoffed. Knowing Laura? She'll fight just to spite me. He smiled grimly. Let her. We've got the upper hand. I'll draw up the paperwork today. You'll need to serve her with the divorce petition. Are you ready for that? I swallowed hard. The thought of handing her those papers made my stomach turn, but there was no turning back now. Yeah, I said. I'm ready. I left the office with a sense of grim determination. This was happening. The life I'd built with Laura was over, and now I was picking up the pieces. There was a strange sense of relief in having a plan, in knowing that I was taking control of the situation. But as I walked to my car, dread crept in. Serving Laura with divorce papers felt like lighting the fuse on a bomb. I knew she wouldn't take it well. She'd scream, cry, blame me, she'd do anything to make herself the victim. I sat behind the wheel, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. You can do this, I told myself. You have to do this. I wasn't ready to go back to Matt's place yet. I needed a distraction, someone who wasn't tangled up in the mess of my marriage. I remembered Sarah's call from the night before and decided to take her up on her offer to talk. I texted her, "Hey, are you free to meet? I could use a friend right now." Her response was almost immediate, of course. Coffee shop downtown in 30 minutes? I agreed and headed over, my mind still spinning. When I walked into the coffee shop, she was already there, sitting at a corner table. Her face softened when she saw me. "Hey," she said, standing up to hug me. "You holding up?" "Barely," I admitted. We sat down, and she gave me a sad smile. "I still can't believe she did this to you." "Yeah," I said, my voice bitter. "Me neither." She looked down at her coffee, her fingers tracing the rim of the cup. "I wanted to tell you sooner, Eric. I really did. But I didn't have proof, and I didn't want to believe it myself." "It's not your fault," I said. "I should have seen it. The signs were all there." No one wants to believe the person they love could betray them like that, she said quietly. You trusted her. That's not a weakness. I looked at her, the lump in my throat threatening to choke me. It feels like one. She reached out and squeezed my hand. You're stronger than you think. And you're not alone in this. I'm here for you. Thanks, Sarah, I said, my voice rough. That means a lot. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything hanging between us. For the first time in days, I felt a tiny spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I'd get through this. Later that afternoon, David called me. The papers are ready. You can come by and pick them up whenever you're ready. I felt my stomach drop. This was it, the point of no return. I'll be there in an hour, I said. As I hung up, I took a deep breath. My hands were steady now, my resolve hardening. Laura had made her choice. Now I was making mine. It was time to end this nightmare. When I walked into David's office to pick up the divorce papers, the reality of it all felt like a vice clamping down on my chest. The receptionist handed me a thick envelope, her expression carefully neutral. My fingers trembled slightly as I took it. These papers represented the official end of my marriage, the final nail in the coffin of a relationship I thought would last forever. David stepped out of his office just then, his eyes meeting mine with a steady calm. You holding up okay, Eric? I nodded, even though we both knew it was a lie. I will be. He placed a hand on my shoulder. Remember, serving these papers is the first step toward getting your life back. It might be rough, but you'll come out stronger on the other side. I managed a tight smile. Thanks, David. He nodded. I've arranged for a process server to deliver them, but if you want to do it yourself, that's your call. I took a deep breath. The thought of confronting Laura again made my stomach twist, but some part of me needed to be the one to hand her those papers. I needed her to see the finality in my eyes. I'll do it myself, I said quietly. The drive back to the house felt like trudging through quicksand. Every mile brought me closer to the woman who had wrecked my life. My grip on the steering wheel was iron tight, the envelope sitting like a lead weight on the passenger seat. When I pulled up to the driveway, her car was there, the same sleek silver sedan that I used to love seeing, the one I used to think of as a symbol of us. Now it felt like a taunt, a reminder of all the lies she told while coming and going. I got out of the car and walked to the front door. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my ears. With shaking fingers, I rang the doorbell. I heard footsteps. Then the door opened. Laura stood there, her face twisting into a scowl the moment she saw me. What do you want, Eric? She snapped, her eyes narrowing. I held up the envelope. This is what I want. She glanced at the papers, her eyes widening for a split second before narrowing again. Divorce papers? She hissed. Seriously? Yes. Seriously. My voice was cold, flat. I wasn't going to let her see me break. We're done, Laura. Her mouth curled into a sneer. You're so fucking dramatic. All because of one mistake? I laughed bitterly. One mistake? You call months of lying and screwing around behind my back one mistake? I shoved the envelope into her hands. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine. She ripped the envelope open, scanning the documents with eyes blazing. You're really going through with this? I am. She laughed, the sound sharp and cruel. Good luck finding someone else who'll put up with your boring ass. Her words stung, but I swallowed the pain. I'd rather be alone than be with someone who doesn't respect me. Her face twisted, and for a second, I thought I saw regret flicker in her eyes. But then she hardened again. Fine. If that's what you want, then good riddance. I turned away before she could see the tears threatening to spill. Goodbye, Laura. I walked back to my car, every step feeling like I was dragging 1,000 pounds behind me. When I slid into the driver's seat, I took a deep, shaky breath. It was done. The papers were in her hands. There was no turning back now. The drive to Matt's place was a blur. By the time I got there, I felt completely drained, like someone had pulled the plug and let all the life drain out of me. Matt was waiting on the porch, his eyes full of questions he didn't need to ask. I handed him the empty envelope and slumped onto the porch steps. "It's done," I muttered. He nodded slowly, sitting down next to me. "How'd she take it?" I let out a hollow laugh. "Exactly how you'd expect. Blamed me, called me boring, acted like she was the victim. Classic Laura," he said with a sigh. "She'll never admit she was wrong." "Yeah," I said. "But it doesn't matter anymore." We sat in silence for a while, the weight of everything settling in. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the yard. It felt like the end of something, the end of us. Matt finally spoke. "You did the right thing, man." "I know," I said, even though it still felt like my heart had been ripped out. That night, I lay in the guest room, staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet, but my mind was loud, replaying every moment of the last few days. I couldn't shake the image of Laura's face when I handed her the papers, the anger, the disbelief, the cold indifference. I wondered if she was thinking about me now, if she felt even an ounce of regret. Probably not. Laura wasn't the kind of person to look back. She'd move on, probably with Anthony, and convince herself that she'd done nothing wrong. I rolled over, pressing my face into the pillow. The tears came then, silent and hot, soaking into the fabric. I let them come, let the grief wash over me. I had to let it out, or it would eat me alive. Eventually, the exhaustion took over, and I drifted into a restless sleep. I woke up to the harsh buzz of my phone. Blinking, I grabbed it from the nightstand. The screen lit up with a text message from Laura. My heart clenched as I read it. "Laura, I hope you're happy, you asshole. You ruined everything." I stared at the message, my jaw tightening. I ruined everything? The audacity of her words burned through me like acid. I didn't reply. What was the point? She'd never understand. She'd never see the damage she caused. I blocked her number. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a tiny bit of peace. She couldn't reach me anymore. Waking up the morning after blocking Laura's number was like surfacing from deep underwater. The weight on my chest was still there, but the air felt a little easier to breathe. The guest room was dim, the slivers of morning light sneaking through the blinds. I sat up slowly, every part of me aching, not physically, but with the dull throb of emotional exhaustion. Matt had already left for work, leaving a note on the kitchen counter. "Take your time. Call me if you need anything. Fridge is stocked. I read it twice, appreciating the simplicity. I didn't need long speeches or sympathy. Just knowing someone had my back was enough. I poured myself a cup of coffee, the bitterness grounding me. The divorce papers were served, Laura was out of my life, and the next chapter had to start now, whether I was ready or not. Sitting at Matt's kitchen table, the silence was deafening. This was the part no one prepares you for, the hollow emptiness that comes after the storm. The anger, the adrenaline, the confrontation, those were all consuming, burning hot and fast. But now, in the aftermath, there was just nothing. I scrolled through my phone, mindlessly flicking through social media. Every happy couple, every smiling selfie, felt like a punch to the gut. I couldn't escape the thought, that used to be me. I used to be happy. I knew I had to do something, anything, to break out of this spiral. Sitting around feeling sorry for myself wasn't going to help. I needed to reclaim my life, piece by piece. I opened my contacts and hesitated before calling a name I hadn't dialed in years, Ryan. We used to be close before life, work, and my marriage pulled me away. He was the kind of guy who'd give it to you straight, no bullshit. Ryan answered on the second ring. "Eric? Holy shit, man, it's been forever." "Yeah," I said, managing a weak smile. "It's been too long. What's going on? You sound like hell." I laughed bitterly. "Because I am. Long story short, Laura cheated on me. I filed for divorce." There was a pause, then a low whistle. "Damn. I'm sorry, man. You want to grab a drink and talk about it?" "Yeah. I think I need that. Tonight at O'Malley's?" Sounds perfect. I hung up and felt a tiny spark of relief. This was the first step back to normalcy, reconnecting with people who actually gave a damn about me. O'Malley's was a dive bar we used to haunt in our 20s. Walking in, it was like stepping back in time. The same sticky floors, the same neon beer signs flickering above the bar. Ryan was already there, a beer in front of him and a grin that faded the moment he got a good look at me. "Jesus, you weren't kidding," he said, standing up to give me a hug. "You look like you've been through a war." "Feels like it," I muttered, dropping onto the stool beside him. We clinked glasses, and I took a long swig of beer. The cold bitterness spread through me, a welcome distraction. "All right," Ryan said, leaning back. "Tell me everything." And I did. I told him about the late nights, the weird excuses, the burner phone, and finally, the moment I caught Laura in the backseat of that taxi with Anthony. I relived it all, the rage, the disbelief, the sickening clarity of betrayal. Ryan listened, his jaw tight, his fingers tapping restlessly against his glass. When I finished, he let out a slow breath. "She's a piece of work," he said. "I don't know how you didn't lose your mind." "Felt like I did," I admitted. "I still feel like I'm losing it." He shook his head. "Nah, man. You're stronger than that. You made the right call. Getting out, cutting her off, that takes guts." I stared into my beer. "Doesn't feel like it. Feels like I'm just drifting." "You're not," he said firmly. "You're surviving. And soon you'll be living again. Trust me." I looked up at him, the conviction in his eyes giving me something to hold on to. Maybe he was right. Maybe I wasn't as lost as I felt. We were halfway through our second round when I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned, expecting to see a waitress or a random drunk, but my heart skipped a beat. It was Sarah. Her eyes widened in surprise. "Eric? Ryan?" Ryan grinned. "Well, if it isn't Sarah. Been a minute." She smiled, but her eyes quickly flicked back to me, concern etched on her face. "Hey. How are you holding up?" I shrugged. "Barely." She glanced at Ryan. "Mind if I borrow him for a second?" Ryan raised his hands. "All yours." Sarah gestured to a quiet corner booth. I followed her, my mind buzzing with questions. We slid into the booth, and she leaned in, her voice soft. "I wasn't expecting to see you here," she said. "But I'm glad I did." "Yeah?" I managed a weak smile. "I guess it's good to get out." She nodded. "I've been worried about you. After everything. I didn't want you to think you were alone." I swallowed hard. "It's hard not to feel that way." "You're not," she said firmly. "And if you need someone to talk to, someone who understands what you're going through, I'm here." Her eyes were sincere, and for a moment, the weight on my chest eased just a little. I nodded, my voice rough. "Thank you, Sarah. That means more than you know." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "One step at a time, Eric. You'll get through this." For the first time in what felt like forever, I believed her. Sitting in that dimly lit booth with Sarah, I felt a warmth I hadn't experienced in what felt like years. Her hand still rested lightly on mine, her touch gentle but grounding. The noise of the bar faded into the background as I focused on her eyes, steady, kind, and unwavering. "I was serious when I said you're not alone," she said softly. "I know how dark it can get after something like this." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. I didn't think it would hit me this hard. I thought I'd be angry. And I was. But now it just feels like everything's been hollowed out. She nodded. "It's because you gave her your all, and she threw it away. That kind of betrayal doesn't just hurt, it reshapes you. But it doesn't have to break you." Her words struck something deep inside me. I hadn't realized how desperately I needed to hear that. "I don't even know who I am without her." "You'll figure it out," she said with a faint smile. "You get to decide who you want to be now. And trust me, that's more powerful than you think." A lump rose in my throat. For the first time, I felt a flicker of possibility. Maybe I could rebuild. Maybe I wasn't doomed to drift through life as a broken shell of myself. "Thanks, Sarah," I whispered. "You've been more of a friend to me than I deserve." She squeezed my hand again. "Don't say that. You deserve people who care about you. I'm just sorry I didn't do more sooner." I shook my head. "You did more than enough." For a moment, we just sat there, the silence between us comfortable. I could feel a connection, not romantic, not yet, but a bridge being built over the wreckage of my old life. A lifeline. As we stood to leave, my phone buzzed. Instinctively, I pulled it out and glanced at the screen. A surge of cold dread washed over me. It was from an unknown number, but the message was unmistakably from Laura. "Laura, I need to talk to you. Please. It's important." I stared at the words, my heart hammering in my chest. My thumb hovered over the screen, a storm of emotions crashing through me. Anger. Fear. Curiosity. Sarah noticed the shift in my expression. "Everything okay?" "It's Laura," I muttered. "She wants to talk." Her eyes darkened. "Don't let her pull you back in, Eric. Whatever she has to say, it's just another manipulation." I knew she was probably right. But part of me still ached for answers, for some closure that might help me make sense of the chaos she'd left behind. "I just want to know why," I admitted. "Why she did it. Why she chose to destroy everything we had." Sarah sighed. "If you think it'll give you peace, then talk to her. But be careful. Don't let her twist things and make you doubt yourself." I nodded. "I'll think about it." That night, lying in Matt's guest room, I couldn't get Laura's message out of my head. The anger I felt toward her was like a constant, low-grade fever, but underneath it was an itch, the need to understand. I stared at the ceiling, the darkness pressing down on me. My mind replayed the moment I caught her in the taxi, the venom in her voice when she called me boring, the cold indifference in her eyes when I handed her the divorce papers. Why did she do it? Was it really my fault? Was I just not enough for her? I knew these questions would eat me alive if I didn't confront them head on. I needed to hear her out, not for her sake, but for my own. I needed to close this chapter with no lingering doubts. I picked up my phone and typed a reply. I'll meet you. Tomorrow at noon. At the park. I hit send and immediately regretted it. But it was done. This was the last conversation I would ever have with her, and I needed to face it. The next morning, I woke up with a pit in my stomach. The hours crawled by as I tried to keep myself busy, but nothing worked. When the clock struck 11:30, I grabbed my jacket and headed out. The park was quiet, the winter chill keeping most people away. I spotted Laura immediately, sitting on a bench near the duck pond. She was dressed in a coat I'd bought her 2 Christmases ago, her hair pulled back into a tight ponytail. She looked smaller than I remembered, her face pale and drawn. She stood up when she saw me, her eyes scanning my face for any sign of softness. I kept my expression blank. "Eric," she said, her voice shaky. "Thanks for coming. Just say what you need to say," I replied, keeping my hands in my pockets. She swallowed hard, her eyes glistening. "I know I messed up. I know you probably hate me." "I don't hate you," I said flatly. "But I don't trust you. And I don't want you in my life anymore." She flinched. "I don't know why I did it," she whispered. "I was unhappy, and instead of talking to you, I just ran away. I made the worst possible choices." "You didn't just run away," I said, my voice cold. "You destroyed us. You lied, you cheated, and you made me feel like it was all my fault." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry, Eric. I wish I could take it back. But you can't," I said, my voice firm. "You can't undo it. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them. Just like I have to live with the aftermath." She reached out, her fingers trembling. "Please, can we try to?" "No." I stepped back, shaking my head. "This is done. I just needed to hear you admit it. To know that I wasn't crazy. She crumbled then, sobbing into her hands. I watched her for a moment, a strange sense of detachment settling over me. The woman standing in front of me was a stranger. Whatever love I'd had for her was gone. "Goodbye, Laura," I said softly. I turned and walked away, the cold air filling my lungs with each step. With every footfall, I felt lighter, the chains of the past breaking apart. For the first time in weeks, I felt free. As I walked away from Laura, her sobs echoing behind me, I felt a mix of emotions I couldn't quite untangle. Relief. Sadness. Finality. The weight of everything we'd been through seemed to lift, piece by piece. The woman I thought I'd spend my life with was now just a chapter, a painful one, that I was finally closing. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Looking back meant giving in to the part of me that still wanted answers, explanations, or some kind of closure that didn't exist. Instead, I focused on each step forward, each breath of cold air that felt fresher, freer. When I reached my car, I paused, gripping the door handle. I took one last deep breath and let it out slowly, watching it fog in the cold air. Then, with a sense of finality, I slid into the driver's seat and drove away from that park, from Laura, from the wreckage of everything we once were. The drive back to Matt's place was a blur. My mind felt strangely empty, like the chaos had finally settled. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, I was okay with that. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was mine to figure out, without Laura's lies and manipulations dragging me down. When I walked into Matt's apartment, he was on the couch, scrolling through his phone. He looked up, studying my face carefully. "How'd it go?" he asked. "It's over," I said simply, hanging up my coat. "I told her goodbye. For good this time." Matt nodded, a hint of relief in his eyes. "Good. You needed that." "I did," I admitted. I dropped onto the chair across from him. "Now I need to figure out what's next." He set his phone down. "What do you want to do?" I shook my head. "I don't know. I feel like I've been living someone else's life for so long that I don't even know who I am anymore." "Then maybe it's time to find out," he said. "Start doing things you want to do. Things you put off because of her." The simplicity of that thought struck me. What do I want? It had been so long since I'd asked myself that question. The next few days passed in a haze of quiet determination. I packed up my things from the house, making sure to avoid Laura. Matt came with me, helping me sort through the remnants of my old life. Clothes, books, random keepsakes, everything that once defined me felt meaningless now. As I packed, I came across a framed photo of Laura and me from our honeymoon. Her smile was bright, her eyes full of promise. I stared at it for a long time before slipping the picture out of the frame. I ripped it in half, watching her image separate from mine. It was cathartic in a way. A physical representation of the emotional split that had already happened. I tossed the pieces into the trash and moved on. One morning, Matt suggested we hit the gym. I hadn't been in months. Between work and the emotional hurricane of my marriage, I'd let myself go. But something about the idea appealed to me. Maybe it was the chance to work out some of the rage still simmering inside me. When we got there, I felt awkward, out of place. The smell of sweat, the clinking of weights, the rhythmic thuds of people pounding on treadmills. It was a world I'd forgotten. Matt led me to the punching bag, handed me a pair of gloves, and grinned. "Go on," he said. "Take out some of that frustration." I hesitated, then slipped the gloves on. The leather was tight and reassuring. I took a deep breath and threw a tentative punch. The bag barely moved. Matt laughed. "Come on, man. Hit it." I gritted my teeth and swung harder. The impact jolted up my arm, and something inside me snapped. I started punching in earnest, each hit harder than the last. Images of Laura flashed in my mind, her sneer, her cold eyes, her lies. Anthony's smug face. The betrayal. The humiliation. Thud. 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 The bag absorbed every punch, every ounce of rage and heartbreak I poured into it. My arms burned, my breath came in ragged gasps, But I didn't stop until I couldn't lift my fists anymore. When I finally stepped back, sweat dripping down my face, Matt nodded approvingly. Feel better? I nodded, gulping in air. Yeah. I do. For the first time in weeks, the anger felt manageable, like I'd finally started to bleed it out. That night, as I sat on Matt's porch with a beer in hand, I let my mind wander to the future. The fog was starting to lift, and possibilities were slowly taking shape. I thought about the things I'd always wanted to do but never did because of Laura, trips I'd postponed, hobbies I'd given up, friendships I'd let slip away. Maybe it was time to start living for me. My phone buzzed with a message. For a split second, my heart clenched, thinking it was Laura. But when I checked, it was Sarah. Sarah, hey, just wanted to check in. How are you doing? A small smile tugged at my lips. I typed back. Me better. One step at a time. Her reply was almost instant. Sarah, that's all you need. Let me know if you want to grab a coffee sometime. I stared at the screen, feeling warmth spread through my chest. Maybe this was the start of something new. A friendship. A lifeline. Maybe, eventually, something more. But I wasn't in a rush. For now, it was enough to know that someone cared. Me, I'd like that. Thanks, Sarah. As I put the phone down, I took a long sip of beer, feeling the cold night air wash over me. The pain was still there, but it was starting to lose its grip. I wasn't healed. I wasn't whole. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I would be. The next few days settled into a quiet rhythm. Mornings were spent at the gym with Matt, afternoons consumed by organizing my life, meeting with my lawyer, sorting out finances, and preparing for the divorce proceedings. The nights were the hardest. They stretched out endlessly, the silence amplifying the void that Laura left behind. But I was getting through it, one day at a time. The anger that used to burn so hot had cooled into something manageable. It was still there, but it didn't consume me. I'd found ways to channel it: the gym, long drives, and spending time with people who actually cared about me. For the first time in a long time, I was doing things for me. One afternoon, I got a message from Ryan. Ryan, a few of us are getting together for drinks tonight. Come out. You need this. I hesitated. Part of me still wanted to curl up and hide from the world. But another part, the part that was tired of being miserable, knew I needed to get out, to remind myself that life didn't end just because my marriage did. Me, yeah, I'm in. Where at? He replied with the name of a bar downtown. I felt a spark of anticipation, something I hadn't felt in weeks. Maybe it was time to let loose, just a little. The bar was bustling when I arrived. Music thumped, people laughed, and for once, it didn't feel like the world was mocking me. Ryan waved me over to a table in the back where a few familiar faces were gathered. Eric! He called, raising his beer. Get over here, man! I grinned, the tension in my shoulders easing as I walked over. The guys welcomed me back like no time had passed, like I hadn't spent the last few years isolating myself in a failing marriage. Good to see you, man, Mike said, clapping me on the back. We've missed you. Yeah, I said, the words catching in my throat. I've missed you guys too. It felt good. Normal. Like I was reclaiming a part of myself that Laura had chipped away, bit by bit. A couple of hours in, I felt lighter than I had in months. The laughter, the easy conversation, it was exactly what I needed. I was halfway through another beer when Ryan leaned in and nodded toward the bar. Hey, isn't that Sarah? I turned, my heart skipping a beat. It was Sarah. She was standing at the bar, her dark hair falling over her shoulders as she waited for her drink. She glanced around, her eyes landing on me. Her face lit up in a smile, and she waved. Go talk to her, man, Ryan said, nudging me. I hesitated for just a second before I stood up and made my way over. My heart was pounding, but not from dread, it was something else, something warmer. Hey, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Didn't expect to see you here. She laughed, the sound soft and genuine. Ryan mentioned you'd be here. Thought I'd come by and say hi. I smiled. I'm glad you did. She handed the bartender some cash and picked up her drink. Want to go outside for a bit? It's getting kind of loud in here. Yeah, I said, my pulse quickening. Let's do it. We stepped outside into the cool night air. The noise of the bar faded behind us, replaced by the hum of the city. Sarah took a sip of her drink, her eyes thoughtful. I'm glad to see you out, Eric, she said. You look better. I feel better, I admitted. Still a mess, but a little less of one. She smiled. That's progress. We leaned against the railing, the space between us charged with an energy I couldn't quite define. Can I ask you something? She said, her voice hesitant. Of course. Do you ever think about what's next? After all this? I exhaled slowly, the question hanging in the air. Yeah, I do. I think about starting fresh, figuring out who I am without her. And maybe finding someone who actually sees me. Someone who doesn't make me feel like I'm not enough. Her eyes met mine, something soft and hopeful in her gaze. You are enough, Eric. You always were. A lump formed in my throat. I didn't know how to respond, so I just reached out and took her hand. She didn't pull away. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt something real. Something honest. And for now, that was enough. As I stood there holding Sarah's hand, the cool night air wrapped around us, I felt a strange sense of peace. Not the full, all-consuming kind of peace I was chasing, but a flicker of it. Enough to know I was heading in the right direction. Her fingers intertwined with mine felt grounding, real, something solid after months of spiraling chaos. Sarah didn't say anything for a moment, and neither did I. We just stood there, watching the world go by. And for once, I wasn't desperate to fill the silence. Finally, she broke the quiet, her voice soft. You know, I always wondered how things would have turned out if I'd spoken up sooner. I glanced at her, brow furrowing. What do you mean? She took a deep breath, her gaze distant. I mean, I saw the changes in Laura. I knew something was off long before everything blew up. I should have told you my suspicions. Maybe I thought you wouldn't believe me, or maybe I just didn't want to be the one to break your heart. I squeezed her hand gently. You don't need to carry that guilt. Laura made her choices. And maybe I needed to see it for myself, no matter how much it hurt. She looked at me, her eyes shining. I just want you to know. I've got your back now. Whatever you need, even if it's just someone to sit with you in the dark. A lump formed in my throat, and I swallowed hard. Thank you, Sarah. That means more than you know. Her smile was small but genuine, and it warmed something inside me that had been cold for too long. After that night, things shifted in a way that felt natural, unforced. Sarah and I started talking more, coffee meetups, walks in the park, the kind of simple, honest connection I hadn't realized I was missing. There were no expectations, no pressure, just two people who understood each other's pain and were trying to move forward. I made sure to take things slowly. My heart was still bruised, still fragile. I wasn't ready for anything serious, and I told Sarah as much. She nodded, understanding in her eyes. We'll just figure it out as we go, she said. And that was enough. In the meantime, I threw myself into rebuilding the pieces of my life Laura had chipped away. I went back to work with renewed focus, determined not to let the pain define me. I even picked up some old hobbies, things I'd let fall away because of the constant emotional drain of my marriage. But of course, life couldn't just stay peaceful for long. A week after serving Laura with the divorce papers, my lawyer, David, called. His voice had that tight, clipped tone that always meant bad news. Eric, I need you to come in, he said. Laura's lawyer has filed a counterclaim. She's contesting the divorce terms. I felt my jaw clench. On what grounds? She's claiming emotional distress and financial dependence, David said. She wants alimony and half the house. I nearly dropped the phone. You've got to be kidding me. Alimony? She cheated on me. David sighed. It's a classic tactic. She's trying to squeeze whatever she can out of you. But don't worry, with the evidence we have, it's a weak play. It's just going to make things messier and take longer. Great, I muttered. Just what I need. We'll fight it, Eric. But you need to be prepared for the long haul. I hung up, my stomach churning with rage. Laura wasn't just satisfied with blowing up our marriage. She wanted to drag me through the mud, to punish me for daring to walk away from her betrayal. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. I wasn't going to let her win. She'd taken enough from me already. That night, I told Matt and Sarah about the counterclaim. Matt paced the living room, his fists clenched. What a fucking piece of work, he spat. She cheats on you, wrecks your life, and now she wants a payday? Sarah was quieter, her eyes full of concern. How are you holding up? I shrugged, the weight of it all pressing down on me. I'm tired. But I'm not giving in. She wants a fight? Fine. I'll fight. Matt nodded. Damn right you will. And you've got us backing you up. Sarah took my hand, her touch soft but firm. You're not alone in this, Eric. We'll get through it together. Her words settled something deep inside me. Laura could try to make this as painful as possible, but I wasn't the broken man she thought I was. I was stronger than she realized. And I had people who cared about me, people who wouldn't let me fall. The next morning, I met with David. We went over the counterclaim, line by line, dismantling every weak argument Laura's lawyer had thrown in. The adultery evidence was solid. The financial records showed Laura was more than capable of supporting herself. David's confidence was infectious. She's trying to rattle you, he said. But we've got this. Stay strong. I walked out of that office with a fire in my chest. I was done playing defense. Laura wanted to make this ugly? So be it. I wasn't going to let her rewrite the narrative. This wasn't just about the divorce anymore. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my future. I was ready for whatever came next. The days leading up to the court hearing felt like a countdown to war. I kept myself busy, gym sessions with Matt, late-night conversations with Sarah, and meticulous meetings with David, my lawyer. The dread of facing Laura again loomed over me, but there was a part of me, hardened by everything I'd been through, that was ready to confront her head-on. David had prepared everything. We had the screenshots of the texts between Laura and Anthony, the receipts, the burner phone, and even a few statements from friends who had witnessed Laura's erratic behavior. The evidence was airtight. But still, a knot of anxiety twisted in my stomach. Matt did his best to keep things light, though his frustration simmered beneath the surface. You know you've got this, right? He'd say, punching my shoulder. She's backed into a corner, and all she can do is claw at you. Sarah was more measured. Stay calm and focused, she told me one night as we walked through the park. Don't let her pull you down into the mud. You deserve better than that. I nodded, her words anchoring me. I was done letting Laura control the narrative. This time, I was taking my power back. The day finally arrived. I dressed in a sharp suit, the first one I'd worn since my world fell apart. As I looked at myself in the mirror, I saw a man who was battered but not broken. My jaw was set, my eyes clear. This was the final chapter, and I was ready to close the book. Matt drove me to the courthouse, the silence between us comfortable. As we pulled up, he gripped my shoulder. You've got this, man. Don't let her see you sweat. I nodded and stepped out of the car, my heart pounding. The courthouse loomed large, a symbol of justice or judgment. I wasn't sure which yet. Inside, I met David, who gave me a reassuring nod. Ready? Let's do this. We entered the courtroom, and there she was. Laura. She was seated at the defendant's table, dressed impeccably, her makeup perfect, but her eyes were cold and hard. Beside her was her lawyer, a stern-looking woman who oozed self-righteousness. Laura's eyes flicked to me, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw uncertainty. But then she smirked, a twisted attempt at confidence. It didn't matter. The Laura I once knew was gone. The proceedings started, and Laura's lawyer wasted no time. She launched into a dramatic speech about how Laura had suffered emotional neglect, how she'd been forced into a compromising situation, because I was allegedly distant and unavailable. I clenched my jaw, my knuckles white against the table edge. The lies were like acid, burning with every word. But David was ready. When it was our turn, he calmly and methodically dismantled every argument. He presented the texts, the burner phone, and detailed records that showed Laura's consistent deception. Each piece of evidence chipped away at the facade she was trying to maintain. I watched Laura's expression shift from smug to defensive to panicked. Her lawyer tried to object, to deflect, but the damage was done. The truth was out in the open, ugly and undeniable. When Laura took the stand, my heart hammered in my chest. She tried to maintain her composure, but the cracks were showing. David's questions were sharp, relentless. "Mrs. Mitchell, can you explain these text messages?" He held up the printouts of her conversations with Anthony. Her voice wavered. "They were just misunderstandings. I wasn't thinking clearly." David's brow lifted. "You told Anthony that your husband was a boring loser. Is that a misunderstanding too?" Her face flushed, and she glanced at me, her eyes narrowing. "I was angry. I didn't mean it." David nodded. "And this receipt from a motel, dated 2 weeks before your husband filed for divorce, was that another misunderstanding?" She swallowed hard, her eyes darting to her lawyer. I made mistakes." David's voice was cool. "You didn't just make mistakes, Mrs. Mitchell. You made choices. Repeatedly. And now you're asking for financial support from the man you betrayed." Her lawyer tried to intervene, but the damage was done. Laura's carefully constructed lies were collapsing around her. The judge's ruling came swiftly. Divorce granted on grounds of adultery. No alimony. The house would remain mine. The moment the words were spoken, a rush of relief swept through me. It was over. Finally, truly over. Laura's face was a mask of fury and disbelief. She shot me a venomous look as she stood up, her lips curled into a sneer. "You think you've won, Eric? You'll always be a pathetic, boring nobody." I met her gaze steadily. "Maybe. But at least I'm free." She turned on her heel and stormed out of the courtroom, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. I let out a long breath, my shoulders finally loosening. David clapped me on the back. "You did it, Eric. It's done." Matt grinned from the gallery, giving me a thumbs up. And standing beside him, Sarah smiled softly, her eyes shining with pride. Outside the courthouse, the winter air was crisp and clear. I took a deep breath, the weight on my chest finally lifting. Matt slapped my shoulder. "Drinks are on me tonight, man." I laughed, the sound feeling foreign but welcome. "You're on." Sarah stepped closer, her hand brushing mine. "You okay?" "For the first time in a long time," I said. "I think I am." She smiled, and for a moment, the world felt bright again. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was mine to walk. And I was no longer walking it alone. The cold air outside the courthouse felt different now. Sharper, cleaner, like I could finally breathe again. The weight that had been crushing me for months had lifted. It wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the end of a prison sentence I didn't realize I'd been serving. Matt was already texting people, probably organizing a celebration I wasn't sure I was ready for. Sarah stood beside me, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite name: relief, hope, maybe even pride. She reached out, brushing her fingers against my hand, and that small gesture grounded me more than anything else had. "You really did it," she said softly. "Yeah," I whispered, feeling the reality settle in. "It's over." But it wasn't just over. It was the beginning of something new. The end of my old life meant the start of a new one where I wasn't tied down by lies, betrayal, and the constant feeling of being less than. I was free to figure out who I was, and for once, I wasn't terrified of the answer. That evening we gathered at a small bar, just a few close friends. Matt, of course, was in full party mode, already a few drinks deep by the time I walked in. He clapped me on the back, his grin wide. "To new beginnings!" he shouted, raising his glass. "To Eric!" everyone echoed. I smiled, the warmth of their support seeping into my bones. I took a sip of my drink, feeling it burn on the way down. For once it felt good, like it was cleansing me from the inside out. Sarah slid onto the bar stool next to me. "How does it feel?" she asked, tilting her head. I thought about it for a moment. "Weirdly good," I admitted. "Like I've been dragging around a bag of bricks, and I finally dropped it." She laughed softly. "That's a pretty accurate metaphor." I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized how much she'd been there for me. Steady, patient, never pushing. Just there. She caught me staring and raised an eyebrow. "What?" she asked, smiling. "Nothing," I said, shaking my head. "Just thank you. For everything." "You don't have to thank me," she replied. "I'm just glad you're starting to see what I've seen all along." "And what's that?" She leaned in a little closer. "That you're stronger than you know. And that this isn't the end for you, it's a second chance." I swallowed hard, the emotion rising in my chest. "I hope you're right." "I know I am," she said softly. As the night wore on, I felt the grip of the past loosening. Each laugh, each clink of a glass, each shared story reminded me that life didn't end with Laura's betrayal. If anything, it was just beginning. At some point, I excused myself and stepped outside to get some fresh air. The city buzzed around me, alive and vibrant. I pulled out my phone and, on impulse, scrolled to a folder I'd kept buried deep. Photos of Laura and me, snapshots of a life that felt like someone else's now. I stared at the images for a long moment before hitting delete. One by one, they vanished, until the folder was empty. My past, my pain, erased in a few taps. It didn't bring instant relief, but it was a step. A step toward truly letting go. When I went back inside, Sarah was waiting by the bar, a soft smile on her face. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, feeling a lightness in my chest. "I think it will be." She held out her hand, and I took it without hesitation. Her fingers curled around mine, warm and steady. "Ready to go?" she asked. I nodded. "Yeah. Let's go." We walked out together, the doors swinging shut behind us. The future was still uncertain, still full of unknowns. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid. I was ready to face it, one step at a time. And I wasn't walking alone.